Hello folks, what I'm going to be doing is a review on Dracula and the books related to or sequels to, but before I do that I have another correction from the Time Machine one. I was telling you about from Beyond the Time Machine, talking about how the guy made up his own technology and terminology for space travel. I meant time travel. And I'm sorry I actually saw that, but unfortunately what you've now seen you cannot unsee. Dracula. This is a huge book to talk about. It was influenced, and it influenced a lot of other books. This is my copy. Brad Stoker, right there. Um, this was influenced by other books before it. Uh, Outside of the fact it was also influenced by Dracula, uh, the Impaler, actually. This is probably one of the best books if you want to get into the history of it. The problem is a lot of history is propaganda. We know a lot about what he did by the Germans, Europeans, Ottoman Empire, and they're mostly lying because they didn't like him. So this book was published in Europe that still slightly believed in vampires and vampirism. Uh, there you go. First published in 1914. This is a reprint of that very famous book, revised in 1924. Still, still wonderful though. It gives you an idea. It's a historical document, really, when you think about it. But Dracula wasn't in a vacuum. Like the Time Machine, there's other. The Time Machine was in other time traveling stories around it. So, there's other vampire stories, serials. This one, for example, was first published in 1847 as a serial, so it actually wasn't a book. It was actually a series of stories, chapters. This is actually 3 volumes of this, and it's very interesting. He's being paid by the word, so it's very lengthy. There's other stories also. This is a 3-in-1 book with Chaz Dracula. Woo, let's go the other way here. Dracula, Camilla, and the vampire. And this also has a short story called Dracula's Guest, which is actually a very short story dealing with the English traveler going to the castle. I, I'm assuming it is kind of like a prequel, or maybe he's testing out his idea. Uh, if you actually don't have a copy of Dracula yet, this would be a good one to get because it actually has a little bit of history and has the other stories that influenced uh, the idea of Dracula. Now, as you know, basically the idea is the Prince of Vampires wants to modernize. He wants to go to England. He wants to get out of the Eastern Europe. He wants to enter the modern world. There's a lot of that in this book, Modern World. Okay, we're talking about train schedules, which in some ways, in some of the old early 19th century, excuse me, late 19th century, early 20th century, is almost civilization in itself. The idea that train schedules, a lot of that happened in Victorian novels. It was almost the symbol of civilization. There's also basically the fact that this is written in a form of letters, memoirs, diaries, news reports, very realistic. The Lovecraft would take that, other people would take that. So it very much influenced just writing in itself, not just horror writing. Now there's a whole bunch of sequels, and I want to get through them as quickly as possible and I'm sticking to Dracula or Dracula related, Hellsing, stuff like that. The most probably interesting is Fred Saberhagen. He wrote a lot of ones about Dracula. This one, as opposed to being in the form of letters, is in the form of tapes. And as you can see, the illustration there is more influenced by the book than any of the movies. He's very much there a warlord of the mid 15th century. Other sequels: Quincy, Morris Vampire. Probably pronounced his first name wrong. The idea that Dracula's living beyond the book, the first book, is because, frankly, he wasn't killed by a stake, he wasn't killed by fire, he wasn't killed by beheading. He was killed by a Bowie knife right before sunrise, and he turned to dust. Well, since the three wives in the first Dracula book were able to transform and travel around in dust, there's many people who question he probably survived. Are you sure he's dead? Well, he was dead to begin with. Uh, this is a very good one. This is actually first of three uh, novels. Kim Newman. Basically, his books are like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. He brings everybody, every vampire, every historical figure. This one's dealing with Jack the Ripper. Dracula is actually married to Queen Victoria. There is Moriarty. There is the Herbert West. Later books have James Bond, the Red Baron. So it really, what if Dracula was a real historical figure? And not just the fictional Dracula has become a historical figure, not Vlad the Impaler, who was real. This one, vampires are being used by the Germans on the Eastern Front. Kind of actually, there's a lot of Nazis and vampires books. Not all of them are Dracula. That's the first of a three-part. Well, let's see. World of Darkness. Actually, most of their game systems and novels don't go near Dracula, but Dracula is actually in these short stories here. I think they actually wanted to try to stay away from that and be a little original. They're very good at using the myths and legends of the history of vampires without getting into Dracula. This is, I guess, somebody who decided, let's try it. And the stories are very good, actually. He's all over the place, but the story's very good. Now, obviously, if you're going to talk about Dracula, you're going to talk about sequels. You're going to talk about Alucard and Hellsing. Isn't he happy? Mm-hmm. So the manga and the anime. The idea being, once again, that Dracula survived, but he survived as a tool of Hellsing. He either was experimented on, or they got the idea right off the bat, which peel him like an onion and get into his head and make him a servant to fight vampires. Now, if we're going to talk about Hellsing, there is other books actually that focus on Van Helsing. This book actually covers before and after the events in Dracula. There are also short stories, Hellsing. Many faces of Hellsing. Is he a hero? Is he a weirdo? Was he an anti-hero? Was he just out to do whatever he wanted and kind of, I don't want to say outright evil, but was he dark? There's a few very good kind of books about what if Dracula was alive today. Very good settings. There is books, and we're starting to get to the weird stuff now. Descents, Vampire Hunter D actually has Dracula in some of the books. He's supposedly, it gives a lot of hints, so I'm not really spoiling anything. He's the son of Dracula. There are books that deal with Dracula in London. So these are stories that interweave with the original novel, in and out. What is he doing half the time? We don't know what he's doing. Is he just hiding in the basement of some of the houses, or fiddling, playing with his thumbs? No. He's probably going to the opera. He's meeting important people. He is a nobleman. And there are books that deal with prequels. This is actually a series that talks about before Dracula comes to England. Not sure if you could. Now, you can't really talk about Dracula in just the books without getting into actually how it affected films. So here's one book I would suggest that talks. She wrote this book that's not just about Hammer films. This is about Dracula and vampires in particular, and Dracula. Mostly films about Dracula and vampires in general. She unfortunately just died this year, and I was just getting into her this year. I got a autograph photo that's quite like that. I'm kind of editing it because she's in the bathtub, and I actually got an email from her a few months before she died. But it does have in the back a list of vampire, mostly Dracula-related films, and it is almost a history of Dracula and vampires in film, and you'd probably want to get that if you can. Obviously, the one you want to really get is Dracula. And this is a two-set. This has the English version and the Spanish version that was made side by side. They used the same settings, they used the same script, but they used a little more energy. And of course, the actresses, one of them's from Mexico, they're a lot shapier than the American actresses, and they wear more revealing outfits because, well, they have a different market, mostly in America, Spain, so on. They're not the only ones to try Dracula. Dracula was BBC. Pretty good one, actually, though. There's one point where he's sucking the blood out of a woman's neck, and he's actually making noises like a pig, and the blood actually is kind of almost looks kind of like they added some sort of jello to it, and it actually unnerved me, and I'm used to vampire books and vampire novels. The kind of one that critics had mixed feelings about. I think it actually did pretty well. Now, if we're getting to Van Helsing, yeah, we probably should show this one too. Uh, you might have seen it. I liked it, but it really did play around with it. There's the werewolf. There's Frankenstein. So it is a rewriting of the whole history. Not bad. If once again, if you liked League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, you'd probably like that. There's also a documentary that I would suggest. The reason I'm suggesting this is that this woman was actually, her grave was found. They realized that she had been treated as she was a vampire. They had buried her with all the attentions of treating her like a vampire. And one of the things is they believe she might have influenced the writing of Dracula, because the short story I was talking about, the prequel, the little test, the English traveler going to the castle actually stops at a tomb of a princess who turns out to be a vampire. He's saved by a wolf, who we are assuming is Dracula, saving his victim from another vampire. He's not really saving him for any good reason. But this does get into Dracula, the writing of Dracula. It's actually very good. Now, Dracula, ironically enough, there's a lot of vampire role-playing games. I just talked about World of Darkness. Well, there's some that focus solely on Dracula. In fact, this is the one based on the movie. And there's another one based more on the historical Dracula, Vlad the Impaler. So they make him a vampire, but they took most of the historical information, daily life, peasants, dress, outfits, and it's very interesting. D20 system, if you're interested in that. That's really it. If I had gotten into every vampire thing, everything that ever dealt with Dracula, I would be here for another probably half hour. So thank you for listening. Next time I'm actually probably going to talk about Rome, which is one of my favorite subjects. Have a good night.